Welcome to Ask the Expert with noted radio host Steve Sleeper. Each week, Steve interviews entrepreneurs and professionals and shares their intriguing stories of success and service. Now, here's radio veteran Steve Sleeper.
Our guest today on Ask the Expert is Stephanie Cooper. She's with the law offices of Stephanie R. Cooper in New York City. Stephanie, how are you today?
Oh, I'm just fine. How are you today?
I'm good. As we're talking, it's a Friday, so, Friday's always good. Hey, tell me a little bit about your firm and yourself.
Well, we have a small firm. I started out my practice in large conventional corporate firms and discovered that I preferred to function in a smaller, more efficient atmosphere. So I got trained in the big leagues and then made my big leagues a little bit smaller and more affordable for people and more personal in terms of service. I started out trained as a commercial civil litigator, so I learned all about fighting and learned that I prefer resolution to conflict. So as I am both a lawyer and a mediator, and I try to use those principles in my practice.
Now, a little bit about yourself. You had a career before you were an attorney, wasn't it in music, didn't you tell me?
Yes, I was. I have a Master of Fine Arts in Chamber Music, which was helpful for the law because in chamber music you have to learn to listen to people. And I loved performing, which I still get to do in the courtroom. But I woke up one day and realized that there was a half of my brain that felt a little empty, and I decided to fill it with law school.
Well,
and didn't know.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I didn't know whether I was crazy until I got there, but when I got there, it explained everything, and I loved it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, and this explains the interesting mix of services to a certain degree. It explains the interesting mix of legal services you provide. But tell us about that.
Well, the core of my practice is contracts. We consider ourselves contract lawyers, and contracts govern relationships, and we're taught in our first year of law school that the great value of a contract is that it provides certainty for people in their dealings. And so I have a number of focused expertises which involve contracts, so that they range from art and entertainment law, which is really a contract-based discipline, employment law, and matrimonial law, which is marriage is a contract. So that's how it ranges.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, you're in New York City, you're in Manhattan, and with your background and where you're at, it makes sense that you specialize in arts and entertainment law. Now, I'm fascinated by that. Tell us more about what you do there.
Well, it turns out that I had a sort of natural constituency from the musicians that I spent almost half my life playing music with. But I also grew up in a family of visual artists and actors, and so it turned out that I spoke the language of the arts. And just in terms of generally circulating with people, I also, there was a kind of a second career in there that led me from performing to law because I was hired once to direct the publication of a great musical encyclopedia that Macmillan London produced. And just all of the experiences that I had seemed to lead through synthesis to where we are today.
Okay. And, I was looking at your website, by the way, it's StephanieCooper.com, STEPHANIE, Cooper.com. And
it's Stephanie R. Cooper.
Well, I'm glad you corrected me. It's StephanieRCooper.com.
In fact, it's such a long website that I changed it recently to SRCNYC.com, which is an easier way to find it.
Well, let's use SRCNYC.com because that's easier and pithier sounding. But
right.
But I was looking at your website and just reading through it, it seemed like the arts and entertainment law would dovetail, for instance, well with employment law. I mean, is that a good observation on my part, or what do you think?
It's almost, they use the term when they're educating lawyers as seamless web. Everything does seem to be interrelated, so that if I'm representing, as I once did, a famous string quartet in their dealings with Sony Classical Records, this has to do with knowing the world of specific mechanical rights and how records are produced, and it has to do with employment contracts, and it has to do with understanding promotion as well, and how careers are made, so that there's a little bit, it all interrelates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We could say that about the intellectual property law, but tell us what that is, intellectual property law.
When any artist creates something original, they ought to be smart and protect their ownership of it so that somebody else doesn't exploit it and make a living from it. And we have a well-established body of federal law that governs the rights that people have in their creations, whether it's a poem or a novel or a film or a painting.
Mm-hmm.
And when you register your work, it's registered in the Copyright Office, but you have a copyright in whatever your original work is, whether you register it or not. That's called common law copyright. And what happens is I get to help people protect their rights before anything bad happens, and then vindicate their rights if someone without authorization or paying for the use exploits the particular artwork.
Business law, saw that on your website. Tell us what you do there.
Well, it's all business, right? If you're setting up an art gallery, you have to understand business principles and get the contracts that get you going. You have to understand the relationships between different kinds of business entities, no matter what your specific discipline is. So I've helped people set up art galleries. I've helped physicians set up partnerships and practices so that they are sharing their rights or dissolving them. My favorite elevator speech is, as a contract lawyer, I can form and dissolve relationships in almost any context.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is family law. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
That's it's not the only emotional kind of practice that law is, because where there are people, there are emotions, and they often run very high. It's the most fraught of the areas in which I practice, but essentially marriage is a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And if a marriage doesn't go well, then you have to dissolve the contract, and it's very helpful to be able to do that without emotionalism and to be able to separate the issues. And so I not only have litigated matrimonial disputes, I do a lot of mediating, trying to help people get to a resolution of their differences without the destructiveness that comes with in-court fighting.
Well, and that's important, but I would think that with performers, that's got to be tough on a marriage, touring and performing, and the just the demands it makes on a family is. It just seems like that to me. Am I correct in my observation there?
Well, I would say that of all of the divorces that I have presided over, none of them has been with any performing artists.
No kidding! I'll be darned. Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know.
There are a lot of emotions, but when you're a musician or a dancer or an actor, you have a lot of outlet for your emotions.
Well, true.
And usually, what I've really observed over my years of practice is that the conflicts that arise between people, whether they have to do with their work or their art practice or their personal lives, most conflicts arise from poor communication.
Mm-hmm.
When I was first starting out in practice and had just been certified as a mediator, I was appointed to do mediation of small criminal disputes for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And They were trying to cut down on their floods of cases, and so they took the least violent kinds of situations and put people in a room and said, if you can come to a contract and live by it, then you can avoid criminal prosecution. And I was never interested in doing criminal law, but what I learned from that experience so importantly was that almost all of the conflicts that came in front of me came from people not being able to express the truth of what they were feeling.
Okay. Yeah.
And I kind of think, at one point in time when lawyers were viewed perhaps more favorably than they are now, lawyers used to call themselves counselors.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the opportunity to exercise oversight over situations and objectivity and help people articulate in ways they maybe haven't been able to, and that's what led them to the problem in the first place. And when they can articulate what's wrong, they can either solve it or make it go away.
Now, you're also a mediator, and
right.
And to me that term's self-explanatory, but still, I would be interested to hear a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Well, the difference between my representation of a client as a mediator versus a partial attorney, right, of somebody representing your interests as an advocate, is that mediators are neutral.
Yeah.
So I have a client actually who was visiting with me today who's trying to resolve a matrimonial dispute with her husband, and I think both parties have decided that they don't want to go to court. And I cannot act as their mediator because I've already been on her side, and I'm only representing her interests. The rules make it very clear, and you have to be careful about conflicts that have ethical implications. As a neutral mediator, you get people to express themselves. You get them to define what their conflict is. You try and reveal that sometimes one party is dancing harder than another. You get to see that, but you don't take sides.
Mm-hmm.
And you help them to plot their own course toward a resolution.
Okay.
And the goal of that resolution is to set it down in a good, strong, solid contract.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a lot better than duking it out in court.
Well, court is terrible, really. I was telling a client recently that the first law firm where I practiced, they had a sign in calligraphy on the wall quoting Abraham Lincoln. And he was quoted as saying, above all things, discourage litigation. So it can be wasteful. The courts are way too crowded with cases. It can be frivolous and not useful. It certainly can make the conflict worse rather than better, and it takes forever and costs a fortune.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there are situations where a person has an adversary who is just utterly unbending and unwilling to compromise and has done wrong, and your only choice is to go to a forum where hopefully a wise, benevolent judge gets people to listen to one another, gets them to try to resolve their differences, because all of the judges that I've been in front of for the last 30 years much prefer settlements to trials and spend a lot of energy trying to get settlements first before allowing a trial to go forward.
Yeah, I heard a judge one time say, if you bring this to court and leave it up to me, I'm going to cut things with an axe. But if you go to mediation, you can use, a scalpel, and both are painful. But you it can be surgical if you go to mediation. And it's certainly a lot less painful.
And you don't have to depend on the intestinal fortitude of the judge, or what he ate for breakfast, or what she had for lunch. It's much better to achieve a compromise without having a judge hit you on the head.
Yeah, right.
I agree.
What are the grounds for divorce in New York?
Well, New York last year became the last state, the 50th state in the United States, to permit no-fault divorce.
Oh.
So you can actually get a divorce in New York if either party says, this marriage has broken down irretrievably, we can't fix it, and it's been broken for 6 months. that took a lot of anguish out of trying divorce cases or going to court with divorce cases. Before that, there were 6 grounds for divorce. That's the 7th, actually, that range from abandonment to adultery to mental cruelty to a spouse having disappeared for a certain amount of time. And I think there's even a claim, you can file a claim for divorce on the grounds that your spouse has been in prison for 5 years or something like that.
Oh, wow.
They're really not used very much anymore. And before this no fault was enacted in New York, the favorite ground was the 6th ground, which said that 2 people had lived separately and apart for a period of a year pursuant to the terms of a validly executed separation agreement, which meant that if you could achieve a resolution, your divorce would be automatic within a year. It was more laborious than no fault, although it didn't. No fault doesn't mean you don't need a settlement agreement. It means that you have to dissolve your economic partnership, and there are statutes that tell you who owes what to whom for how much marriage, and for if there are children, what the rules are. Because the most important element of divorce law in New York is the protection of the best interests of the children who unfortunately get caught in the process.
Right, and as it should be.
Right.
Okay, very open-ended question, Stephanie. Anything else we should know?
Anything else we should know? I've talked pretty completely about what it is I do. I guess the best thing about my law firm is the people that I associate with, and having a good staff of intelligent people to keep company with and to bat ideas around with makes it very collegial. And for me, I discovered that I much preferred operating that way than sitting alone in a practice room for 7 or 8 hours a day, which got lonely and a little bit boring. And also, I have to say, for me, the great attraction of law practice is people.
Yeah.
And when I started law school, I felt that I had acquired 1,000 or so grandfathers, because way back when the cases started to be written, there weren't any grandmothers writing those cases, and they all had stories to tell me. And I had the privilege of clerking for a year for a great federal judge. His name is Jack Weinstein, and he's still on the bench at the age of 93.
Oh, wow.
And it was during the time of the Agent Orange litigation that I clerked for him. And the courtroom was like a giant theater, and everyone had a story. So I think I'm drawn to the stories from the cases and from what I've seen in the court system, and from the people who come to me every day, each with her story or his story.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Our guest today on Ask the Expert has been Stephanie Cooper with the law offices of Stephanie R. Cooper in New York City and Manhattan. Stephanie, how can we reach you?
You can reach me online at scooper@srcnyc.com, and you can find my website at stephanieRcooper.com or srcnyc.com.
And your phone number?
Oh, my phone number is 212-605-0221. I'm at 575 Madison Avenue, right in the heart of Midtown, and come one and come all.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Hey, thanks for being on the program today, Stephanie. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I love talking with you. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Expert with Steve Sleeper. Join us next time as entrepreneurs and professionals share their intriguing stories of success and service.